Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter. Hello, and welcome to the Ident Review, the show where we have a good look and chat about the various television idents that we've come to know and love over the years. And for this instalment, we'll be taking a look at a rather nostalgic channel for many, Pop. Originally launching as Toons N Tunes in the May of 2003, Pop's remit was to showcase a mixture of both animated content as well as a selection of the latest music videos. In the early 2000s, the internet was around, but video streaming sites such as YouTube were a few years off yet, so channels that showed music videos on air still held a wide degree of popularity with a variety of demographics. Shortly after its test transmissions, Toons N Tunes was rebranded to simply Pop, and 1 year into its life in 2004, the music video strand was completely abandoned, due to the increased competition of music-based channels available on British TV at the time. Now solely dedicated to animated content, Pop had to carve out its own unique identity. So let's see how it was able to do that initially with one of its earliest idents.
Pop! The best for Toons N Tunes. We're watching Pop. We're watching Pop. We're watching Pop. Merry Christmas!
Right now on Pop, it's Calamity Jane! And on Pop Plus, we've got Pop Up!
Now doesn't this just take you back? The early 2000s was quite the magical time for British TV, with channels like Pop seeming exciting and eye-catching despite being a hub for existing animated programming. These are the first kinds of Pop idents I remember seeing as a kid, the simple motif of two lowercase p's with the O of Pop often being represented via a balloon. I loved the pink background that contrasts wonderfully with the bright blue of the balloon, and this is a prime example of a simple concept that's remarkably effective. It's nice that the two P's have some elements of a personality, such as mischievously popping the balloon, filling it full of air, or using it to play tennis. This was around the same time that BBC Two was using personality-based idents for their identity, and this sort of quirky trait was being embraced by several channels. Pop's use of it works well, as it's easy to work out what's going on whilst remaining bright and colourful for its younger-based audience. Also great that we get a Christmas-themed ident too. It's simple again, but full of charm nonetheless. My only criticism would be that the presentation of the letters and the bare-bones nature of the background makes it all feel a little educational? Not that learning is a bad thing, but the continuity too is presented in a way that feels like I'm attending a class. But that's a minor nitpick, and after some time, brand new idents would be introduced to help expand and evolve Pop's image. So let's take a look.
You're watching Pop.
I think this is the one that most of you will remember. I've already discussed this ident on the 100th episode of the Ident Review, which you can check out if you want a 2-hour ident binge, but in the meantime, let's briefly recap my thoughts here. As you can tell, this is a massive step forward from the previous sequence in several ways. The animation is now much more improved and detailed, the notions of the letters being characters now expanded so that they have arms and legs. All adorned in different colours, including the new exclamation mark. They run together and eventually form the Pop logo, presented in the style of a dynamic sound effect in a comic book, which works surprisingly well if you ask me. The music for this one too is iconic to those who grew up with it. It may sound dated now, but if you watch Pop in the later half of the 2000s, there's a good chance you can hum or tap along to that tune no matter when you hear it. The other variant I showed you has the letters dancing in some sort of pseudo-disco environment. This one feels a little more cringe, I have to say, even by 2007 standards. Ident's dancing can work great, but what holds this one back is the limited animation. Seen as it isn't fluid, the characters jitter about from one pose to the next, which just makes the whole thing feel awkward and slightly uncomfortable. So in my opinion, just stick with the generic ident. It's a lot more memorable, and generic though it may be, it became the main identifier of pop for several years. But as with all TV idents, things eventually change. So let's see how pop would try and reinvent itself for the incoming 2010s.
We've got all of your favourite shows right here on Pop.
I would argue that this one's a bit of a downgrade. In a way, we've sort of returned to the more serene nature of the original sequence. The bombastic music has been done away with in favour of what look like bubbles floating up the screen. The animation once again feels like it has improved as the years pass by, and the mixture of colours is rather nice on the eye. When the central bubble explodes, or pops should I say, it reveals the new logo, which is essentially the previous one, now restyled to be primarily a mixture of one or two colours, rather than every letter having a unique one individually. Musically, the little jingle that plays sounds reminiscent of the previous one, which admittedly is a nice bit of continuity between sequences. However, a downside for me is that the personality trait seen in the previous ident has now been removed, which for a channel like Pop, I think is a massive shame. For a channel aimed primarily at younger children, having an ident with characters can work wonders, as we saw with the 2006 variant. Not to say that this revision is completely terrible, but it just feels like it's lacking somewhat. On a side note, from around 2006 and into this era of the late 2000s, Pop was often hosted by a green dragon called Rory. With his limited animation, bright green tones and trusty cat Purdy, these two made for an amusing double act between programmes and are often looked back on fondly. However, they would wave goodbye under the next Pop rebrand, which would occur in 2010. So let's have a look at how Pop would be for this new decade. A very interesting batch for sure. By the dawn of the 2010s, it's clear that the use of 3D animation had become a bit more accessible and less expensive to commission for the sake of a TV ident. In Pop's case, it's nice to see some variety amongst its new sequences. The first one adopts a nature setting, where we see some sort of Venus flytrap creature eat up all the nearby butterflies before burping them out, because burping, kids, is the pinnacle of comedy. It kind of reminds me of the Predator ident that debuted on BBC Two back in the year 2000. But that felt like it had a lot more polish and just generally felt more vibrant and appealing to the eye. The second variant of the 2010 batch we see is more science-like. We see the O of Pop begin to rapidly multiply, breaking the camera screen, before panning out to see a number of robotic arms mess around with multicoloured test tubes. Part of me thinks this sequence should have been played in reverse, focusing on the arms first and then the multiplying O's, but that's just personal preference, I guess. The nature one admittedly works a little better, as to me this one just feels a little clunky and confused. The final variant embodies the theme of popcorn, which is something the channel has done since its earliest days. We see a popcorn bucket attempt to catch as much of it as possible, before it's absolutely swamped by the stuff, which it promptly flicks towards the viewer. Whilst the animation of this and all the variants from the 2010 set is clearly improved from its predecessors, I can't help but feel like there's something missing. Whether it's a stronger punchline or just an added element, this feels somewhat lackluster in comparison to some of what's come before. Admittedly, I didn't grow up with this set at all, so maybe it's just me, but let me know in the comments if you also feel like there just feels like a missing piece to this set. However, in 2013, Pop decided to introduce several new variants to the airwaves, so let's see if they can improve on what was introduced back in 2010. Talk about a drastic improvement. These are so much better than their 2010 counterparts by a considerable margin. The animation again feels improved, and whilst it isn't necessarily state of the art, it doesn't have to be, when the charm and stories of the Idents make up for it. We get several fun scenarios to delve into here, such as a creature being experimented on, a seesaw going wrong, and one of my favourites being the giant musical robot, terrorising a city with his various instruments. They feel so familiar in their concepts, but also unique in how they've adapted them. But my absolute favourite has got to be the sweet invaders, as it were. An alert sounds off, resulting in mini tanks heading out to destroy the enemy, only for them to be turned into sweets when hit. Now, that's a funny concept. Even funnier when the aliens drop what I can only describe as a polo bomb, which destroys the tank and transforms it into the Pop logo. These are the perfect kinds of concepts to use on a channel primarily aimed at young children. They're bright, colourful, they each have their own little unique story to them, and several of them contain characters or set pieces that will remain memorable and recognisable to those who watch. To me, this is the perfect presentation for Pop in the modern era, utilising 3D animation technology while sticking with the simple sort of concepts that made it work in the first place. But we have one final rebrand to look at, which took place in 2015. So let's say goodbye to these winners and see if their replacements can work just as well. Again, is this not another downgrade? Let's start with the positives. The animation once again feels like it has been refined and updated. It feels a lot cleaner, a lot smoother and fluid, and visually does look nice and appealing, with several contrasting colours and shapes. But ultimately, what does this really say about the channel? Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't call these disasters, but they feel more generic than arguably anything we've had before. The music is nice, with the final jingle again echoing some of the themes heard in the mid-2000s, but beyond telling you that this is a Sony network, I feel this new batch didn't really have much to offer. I'd rather take the more basic animation of the 2013 batch any day, if it meant we could have those more charming and appealing idents back on screens. I don't really have much more to say on this batch because, really, what else is there? Nice colour combinations and smooth animation aside, this for me serves as one of the low points of Pop's visual identity. Now, the logo has remained the same since 2015, but in 2020, some new idents were introduced. So before we close out today's episode, let's take a look at those. Nice to see that we finish with an improvement. The use of bright colours and smooth animation continues on from the 2015 set, but what I like here is that we actually have some clear variety as to what's going on. The first variant explodes into a variety of different set pieces, with highlights including the guitar-style Pop logo with music notes flying around, and the final image we have with a thumbs up gesture emerging from the O in the logo. This whole thing communicates a sense of fun, a sense of variety in terms of programming, yet all very exciting to those watching. It feels a little sharper in its concept, rather than feeling hugely generic like the 2015 set. The second variant from 2020 focuses on descriptive words as the focal point of its runtime. At first glance, this may seem incredibly juvenile and tailored towards the youngest of viewers, but don't forget, that is exactly who Pop's target demographic is aimed at. Descriptive words have also been a key part of children's entertainment, such as when showcased in comic books. Like we mentioned earlier, the 2006 idents finished off with Pop in that sort of comic book style panel look, and with Pop being a descriptive word in itself, it only seems right that this variant concludes with the logo amidst a ton of popcorn. Nice to see that the popcorn theme has ran from the channel's inception all the way up until the 2020s. Whilst I think the idents from 2013 still reign supreme over these newer ones, the latest idents from Pop are in a steady place, and we can only hope that going forward, they continue to push the boundaries, remain appealing, and showcase just what Pop is all about as a TV channel. As I said towards the start of this video, Pop is remembered fondly by the many who grew up with it, particularly those of us who did in the mid to late 2000s. Whether you were catching older programming like the various Sonic the Hedgehog series or the Super Mario show, Pop also was a gateway to several older programs, which many have gone on to regard as cult classics. A personal favourite of mine was always Bump in the Night, a stop-motion animation-based program that originally went out in the mid-90s, so go and check that out if you haven't seen it. The earliest Pop Idents, while simple in their animation or just their overall concept, retained a charm and appeal that has lasted throughout the years. And like many TV channels, there were rocky periods, times when it felt like the channel's visual representation was a little overly generic or lacking an essential theme, but despite all of that, Pop continues to thrive to this day, and now being made available to the majority of UK viewers on Freeview, it can continue to introduce a wide variety of programming to children all across the country. We may never see the return of Rory and Purdy, but the Pop name lives on, and long may it continue to do so for many years to come. And so that brings us to the end of another episode of the Ident Review. If you enjoyed this look back at the various idents used by Pop, then please leave a like, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to the channel for lots more ident related content. I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Jen Samantha Pringle, Kelly is Live, Tracy Smith, Hooks Media, Ben Freeman, Ethan Carberry Holt, The Welsh Lady, Bruce Danton, The Broken Kitsumanoid, and Cooking at Nans and DIY, our AMTV staff members.